Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. It is so wonderful to be here hosting this event on behalf of Hammock, behalf of the 2G and 3G survivors, organizations, everyone who came together in coalition to put this wonderful screening and panel on the movie Traces together this afternoon. My name is Rabbi Alana Sklover. I'm the rabbi here at Or Hadash, and I want to take a moment, first of all, to welcome you to our synagogue. We are thrilled to be able to host. And to just point out that under many of our seats, probably under every other seat or every third seat in a row, is a welcome card that says a little bit about who we are as a congregation, what it means to us to be a warm and welcoming and inclusive congregation. And on the back is an incredibly useful floor plan of this first floor. It shares the location of all of the things that we will all certainly need today, restrooms, exits, both emergency and otherwise, locations of rooms where we might go if we need to chat with someone, because we certainly don't want to be chatting with folks during the film. But if you see someone you haven't seen in 15 years and you just need to catch up, head on out to the community room. I would say one of the porches, except it's really cold. And it also has the location of things that, God forbid, we will not need. But if we do, we sure will be glad that we know. Things like fire extinguishers, the defibrillator, emergency exit routes, etc. So yes, for those especially who are new to the building, our floor plan. But it is so wonderful to be here. You'll hear more from me later on. I'm really honored to be moderating this panel, both as the rabbi of the congregation and myself as a 3G survivor of the Holocaust. I want to hand it over to Jacob Dupre from Hammock to give some words of welcome and framing for our program today. Jacob.
Thank you, Rabbi Alana. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As Rabbi Alana has said, my name is Jacob Dupre. I am the program director at the Holocaust Awareness Museum and Education Center located in Elkins Park. Hammock has long been committed to preserving the voices and experiences of Holocaust survivors and their families. This documentary that we will see today will show and discuss today, named Traces, reflects our commitment to the Holocaust education and preservation of memory. In fine detail, Traces explores the enduring impact of the Holocaust through the voices of survivors and, importantly, through the experiences of the second generation, the children of the survivors who grew up with the backdrop of their parents' memories. Often, these aforementioned memories continue in fragmented form, as we will see in the film. With the second generation not only inheriting these memories, they deeply feel it as it seeps into every aspect of their upbringing. Today, we will see how Traces illustrates trauma, resilience, and responsibility, extending far beyond those who directly endured the Holocaust. This emphasizes the role of memory in shaping identity and moral obligation in everyday life. As survivors age and few are able to share their stories firsthand, films such as Traces that we will see today play a crucial role in Holocaust education. In other words, films serve as a form of lasting testimony that ensures personal narratives are not just lost to time and that future generations will understand both the historical reality of the Holocaust and its lasting impact on everyday life. Today's program invites us to reflect not only on the past, but also on the responsibility that we carry to preserve these stories and confront anti-Semitism and uphold the lessons of history. It is through works like Traces that remembrance becomes an active and enduring act. Hammock has long been committed to preserving the voices of experience of Holocaust survivors and their families, such as our legacy library, which recorded and documented local Holocaust survivors that you can access at our website at hammock.org. Thank you for being part of this important conversation. With this, I open the floor to the film.
Thank you all. Welcome back. So I want to invite up the folks who are on our panel this afternoon. Come on down. We have a number of people here who are from the different partner organizations, who the different partner organizations have recruited, who are a blend of second, third, and now fourth generation Holocaust survivors. I want to invite someone who knows my daughter Bina well to go to my office and get her, because I told her she should come to see the panel. Does anyone want to volunteer to go get Bina? You'll go. Thanks, Debbie. All right, well, let me go on over here. Thank you all so much. For how many of you was this right now, just as you're processing it right now, was this the first time you've seen this film? This was your first time. Everyone else got a chance to see it in advance. Great. Okay. So good afternoon. And thank you so much for joining us for this screening of Traces, and especially for this panel conversation. Today's conversation centers on how Holocaust memory is carried across generations by children, by grandchildren, and by great-grandchildren of survivors, and what that inheritance means today. To begin, we'll start by grounding ourselves in language. So my first question for this group is to help orient this community gathered this afternoon. Could one of you briefly explain, or maybe two of you, we'll take representatives from the different groups, briefly explain what it means to be a 2G, a 3G, or a 4G survivor, and how you identify within that generational framework? I saw a hand right away. And as you speak for the first time on the panel, maybe introduce yourselves briefly.
So my name is Stacy Seltzer. I am a 3G, and what's unique and exciting is I'm here with my mom, who's a 2G, and my daughter, who's a 4G. And so to explain that, I'm involved with 3G Philly, which is a group for the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. So our grandparents, thank you. Our grandparents were the youngest surviving generation. And the movie, I'll just say, really hit me because it's so much of what my mom has always shared with me. And so watching it was really powerful. And so 2G, 3G, 4G.
Hi, I'm Simone Gorko. I am a second generation survivor. I've never called myself that particular thing before. That hit me from the film. My parents were both survivors. Sorry, I'm Simone Gorko. I'm a second generation survivor. My parents were both survivors and are no longer with us. I am a member of Sons and Daughters of Holocaust Survivors. We have been a group here in the Philadelphia area since 1979. And I'm happy to be here. The film was very moving. I watched it last night for the first time and thought it was excellent. So thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Simone. And I want to make sure for those, for everyone who's here, that I just put on the closed captioning, which should help people both here, both in the room and on Zoom, understand folks, especially those who are a bit more soft-spoken. But if you're speaking out loud, if we can hold the microphone close to our mouths. Wonderful. I think there was one more person who wanted to speak. Sorry about that.
My name is Gadiala. I'm a 4G, and I feel like, I don't know, my experience is mostly like, it's not as like so pronounced. It's more, it comes up sometimes. It's not every day. And like seeing films like that or listening to like 2Gs or survivors, like I feel kind of connected to it, but also like it's kind of disconnected because I don't know, it's more farther away from me. It's like watered down sort of. So I feel connected, but not like it doesn't hit me as hard.
Thank you. Thank you. I also want to acknowledge that those who are here on the panel are not the only people in this room who could have been on the panel. I want to invite you, if you're someone who identifies as a survivor of the Holocaust, could you raise your hand? What survivors do we have among us? if you feel comfortable, and if you are able to do so, we want to invite you to stand up. In spirit or in body. Who among us here is a 2G, someone who was raised by a Holocaust survivor parent? Okay. 3G, grandchild of a Holocaust survivor, or multiple. 4G, great grandchild of a Holocaust survivor. Nice. And so I want to ask, for those who didn't answer this first question, there's this first question, part 2. When did you first become aware of this generational identity? Yeah. And what's your name?
Sorry. I'm Gabby Seltzer. This is my mom and my grandma. I don't really think there's a specific moment where I became aware of it. It's just kind of always been a part of my life. It's definitely become more like clear as I've become older, because like I waited until I was completely ready to hear my great grandparents' stories and like really understand it. But yeah, it's kind of always just been a part of my life.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Dan Schwartz, and I'm a member here at Or Hadash, so very proud to see all of you here and welcome. I'm also a second generation survivor of the Holocaust. My mother, Bertha Teitelbaum Schwartz, of blessed memory, survived the Holocaust, but her father, Asher, did not. And he, along with my mom's grandparents and numerous other family members, did not survive. My middle name is Asher. And so my grandfather, is someone I carry around every day. And I was born given his name. So it's in my kishkis, as they say. And so, I agree with what was just shared in terms of, the amount of awareness that increased as I got older about it. But really from quite early on, it was something that I was profoundly aware of, that we had this family history.
Thanks. Do you want to say anything?
I'm Evelyn Lipschitz, and I grew up with 2 survivors. And it was very different because we lived in a small town. There were no other families. My parents were originally from New York, and there they had a whole network. But being from Reading, I knew our family was different in many, many ways, from the foods to the languages to the names. I was named for my father's mother, Elsie. I'm Evelyn, and his sister, Irma. And I always felt such responsibility that my father would look at me and think of them. And not having other families, when I see this film, it was so wonderful so I'm normal. Other people had these same feelings.
Thank you all. So we delved a little bit deeper into the topic of growing up with survivor legacy. And some of you started to touch on this a little bit. How did your experience differ? I guess, actually, I'm going to ask our 3 generations of family here. The second question here is, how does your experience differ depending on whether you were raised directly by a Holocaust survivor or by someone who was raised by a survivor? Sort of looking at this, this sort of intergenerational relationship with carrying the legacy of our family's stories and of the Holocaust. So I don't know how you guys want to approach following that. Yeah, we'll go this way, up the generations.
So I think that being raised by someone who it like directly impacted and by someone who has heard about it, I think it's really I think it's different and similar, because when you like meet someone who's really gone through it, and like if you're raised by someone that's really gone through it, it can like make you feel like much more strong about it than you would if it's just someone who's like telling you about it. But I think it still like really hits hard because, you know, like those are your grandparents, your great grandparents that went through all of that.
I would say I always had it easy because I got my grandparents for the fun stuff. So when we used to, get time together, they were doing special things with me, and I wasn't hearing as much and living that trauma. But at the same time, they always shared their stories with me in bits and pieces. And so I didn't have immigrant parents. We had been established in the United States, and I got to spend that special time with them, which I think is unique for the third generation.
I think what's really unique about my story is that I had two sets of grandparents who were also survivors. So it was constantly in my house being spoken about, talked. They told us, so I got stories from my grandparents as well as my parents. So it was just always there.
I feel like that's interesting too, because it means that your parents had parents they could process their experiences with. That so many who are second generation survivors were raised by, we heard so much in the movie, right? I always wish I had grandparents. I always wish that I was like everyone else who had grandparents, right? Thinking about what that voice would have been like, saying, I wish I had my parents to process this with. I wish I could, right? That there's that piece as well. That's right. I didn't mean to only put this family here on the spot, but if anyone else here has a reflection on that question of the differences between being raised by parents who are survivors versus grandparents who are survivors. Yeah. Simone.
I didn't have grandparents. I'm named after both of my grandmothers who died in Auschwitz. And I wanted grandparents. I had two great aunts here in Philadelphia, and they were semi-grandparents, grandmothers. When I was growing up, I grew up in Northeast Philly, and all the girls' grandmothers were knitting them sweaters. And I didn't have a grandmother to knit me a sweater. And I told my mother that I wanted a sweater. And she told her aunt that I wanted a sweater. And she knit me a bright pink sweater, which I can still see. Yeah.
Yeah, I can reflect a little bit with my grandmother who did survive. So while Asher, my grandfather, did not, fortunately, I had an amazing grandmother, Oma, who lived in Israel. Most of my family is in Israel. In fact, my 97-year-old father is on Zoom listening to us speak as we are here today, living in Herzliya. So, hi, Dad. Nice to see you, sort of. But thank you for being here. Anyway, my memory of my grandmother, Oma, I would go to her apartment. She lived in Ramat Gan, Israel, suburb of Tel Aviv, and we would sit around and she would take out photographs, albums, and just decide to share them. And, that was the beginning. She didn't go into deep stories about, all that they went through because it was years of separation and trauma. But at the same time, she wanted me to know who they were, and to remember their names and their faces. And so that for me was the beginning of really being able to hear from her about her experience.
Thank you. So actually, that's a wonderful segue, I think, into our next question, which is about silence versus storytelling. Was the Holocaust openly discussed in your home, or was it something that was largely left unspoken? This is something that I think we've touched on a little bit here and certainly was touched on in the film. But what's your experience been?
Most of the time it was discussed. Like if I wanted to know for a school project or something, it wasn't like hidden away. It wasn't like clipped off or small pieces, like only just answering the questions. I would get details and like the full story. I would know it all. And maybe like some of it was left out if it wasn't so like good for my age or I wouldn't have understood it as well. But I never really left feeling like something was going unsaid. Like the elephant in the room was acknowledged. It wasn't just silence and unspoken horror. It was like I knew it. Heard about it. I was told about it.
Um, it's kind of always been spoken about in my house, um, especially with all the work that my mom does. I knew like bits and pieces of it, like as I was growing up. And as I've gotten older, like, and I've been ready to hear about it, I've sat down with my mom and like she shared my great grandparents' stories. And I recently shared my great grandparents' stories with my Hebrew school class. And it felt really good because it was like Lador Vador, and I got to share like how it should never happen again with everyone else.
My parents always talked about the Holocaust, right up to my face. My parents always talked about the Holocaust. It was always there. They didn't talk about everything that happened, but it was always there. If I didn't want to eat something at dinner, they would say, "Oi, what I would have given to have that in the ghetto, what I would have given to have that in the camp." They told me heroic stories of what they did because both of them were heroes during the war. And it was just always there, and they talked about it, but they didn't talk about all the horror all the time.
I was just going to share quickly, because my family was mostly in Israel, my parents immigrated to the United States in 1957, 2 years before I was born. And so one of the ways that I remember experiencing my mom's experience from the Holocaust, which I believe is the case, is that she literally would cry for about a week after we left Israel, or if my Oma, my grandmother, came to stay with us, which she did a couple of times for as long as a year. When the separation came to happen, it was mom's going to bed for a week. And we just gave her the space, the time to work through what her emotions were. She didn't really talk about it a whole lot other than tears. And that's when I knew, that there was something that she was clearly experiencing, that was unique and different. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to kind of, so this next question sort of goes a bit deeper into this question of how learning about and discussing and holding and coming to hold our family's stories sort of was present in your house. And that's, do you remember the first time you learned about your family's Holocaust history? And sort of the follow-up to that is like, was it something shared intentionally, discovered later, learned through outside sources, and then you asked a question? Was it through a, right, was it a found and uncovered and then shared? Or was it a more, and also the purposefully shared versus the just always ever present? Right. When, I mean, I guess some have already discussed the when did you first become aware of the generational identity? But right, do you remember the first time you learned that the Shoah was part of your family's story?
So with my mother, she spoke about it all the time, and I just knew it. My father didn't speak as much, and one day we were in the basement, and he was very handy, and we were working on a birdhouse together, and he started talking, and I said, Irma, was that your sister? And he said, yes. And then he proceeded, and it opened up a whole conversation. And I'll never forget that basement. And after that, my father was always my idol. But after that, I just couldn't believe all he had been through. His mother, his two twin brothers, his sister were all taken and killed, and nobody knows whatever happened. And he was sent to Kindertransport, where they took the 10,000 children to England, and he was in an orphanage. And can you imagine knowing your father was an orphan, and then years later he was reunited with his father? But I'll never forget that time in the basement when he told me his story.
I was just going to add, I know that my grandparents did not share their stories early on. And my grandmother always says she was told when she came, no one wants to hear these stories. What happened there happened there. Now you're here, you're in a free country, let's move forward. And it wasn't until the 1980s, maybe, that they started sharing. And I know I got bits and pieces. And then during COVID, I said, okay, we're getting this full story. And I was so thankful they were both alive. And I recorded them on the phone, and we spent many, many hours. And they heard my presentations. And so I feel really good being able to speak and know that those stories were heard by them, and kind of had their blessing and their love and support with it. And as you were sharing, you got to listen to the recordings.
I think it was a little bit during COVID that I really started understanding what had happened to my great grandparents and like what they went through. Because I think before that, I wasn't really old enough or mature enough to understand. But like whenever I had a question or anything, like it wasn't like kept away, it was told. And like if I had a follow up question, it was answered. And yeah.
So I'm the one that always knew about it. And I used to do speaking about my family story. And my sister, my father's daughter, was murdered with her mother in Auschwitz. And I knew a few stories, but I didn't know a lot. And there was one time when I was going to speak, and I wanted to speak about Helena. And I asked both my parents, because my mother also knew my sister. I asked both my parents about her, and they told me about her. I miss her. When I was in Yad Vashem the last time, I went to the Children's Memorial, which is amazing. It's all candles and mirrors, and I felt like she was there with me. So that was something I learned about later.
I just want to reflect one thing on that. Simone, what you just shared, I want to reflect the way that the generations are not linear, right? We heard in the movie, there was another family where someone was talking about how their father had previously had two teenage children who both were killed in the Holocaust. And then by the time his parents had them, right, that the generations aren't linear, that you are the same generation as your sister who was murdered in the Holocaust, though you were not yet alive, and still being in that parallel generation. And so sometimes it's not as neat as the survivor generation, the second generation, the third generation. Sometimes we are in multiple places at the same time.
It took me a long time to call her my sister. I used to call her my father's daughter, which was, separated. And one time I heard Menachem Rosensaft talk about, I think, his mother's son, and he called him my brother. And that's when I started calling her my sister.
Yeah. I think the first time was about 5th grade. We were doing like projects and speeches for our Yom HaShoah at school. And I wanted to talk about, I think it was my great grandfather. Oh wait, no, wrong one. My great grandmother. And so I asked my mom and I said, "Can you tell me about her story?" And she answered most of my questions, but she was also kind of just talking. Like it was more like I'd like asked the question and it opened the space. And then she told me more of the stories. And last year, when I was doing another project about an Eshet Chayil, and I chose her again, and I asked my grandmother, and I got to learn even more about their stories and like what happened to her son and his brother. Sorry, different person.
What I think is most important about what you're saying, Gabriella, is that you asked, you know, that's the most important thing. And that's what my sisters, I have two younger twin sisters, and they asked my grandmother, my Oma, you know, to share. She had not spoken about her experience at all when she arrived to then Palestine with my mother and her two younger sisters. And so the fact that my sisters asked, and maybe it was, I'm not sure, a high school project, they were maybe 13, 14 years old, and it then opened the floodgates for my grandmother to really say, you know what, my grandkids are asking, I'm going to say, I'm going to talk about this. And she was recorded and she agreed to do that. And we have her all transcribed. And that gave my mother permission to do the incredible work that she did that I can talk about later.
Thank you. I'm going to infiltrate the panel because I'm the other 3G who's on the panel but not on the panel. And I just wanted to jump in because my experience is really different from yours. In that, and I was like, what? When you were like, it was during COVID when I'm like, what? That was so recent, right? I feel like I'm the other end, and that's that before I can even remember knowing what the word Holocaust was, I knew that my grandma Brunya had jumped off the truck that was taking her to a gas chamber and covered herself naked in the snow. I didn't know that that happened during a time called the Holocaust, or that there were people associated with a party called the Nazis who were systematically trying to exterminate the Jews, right? I didn't know any of that, but I started to know bits and pieces of my family's story because I can't remember a time that my grandmother didn't speak. Ah, nice. Okay, so it was bits and pieces and then putting it together. So my grandmother, so she didn't start speaking in public and giving presentations until I think the 70s. But she spoke at more than 1,000 elementary, middle, high schools, and colleges across the Midwest. My family was settled in Kansas City, Missouri. And there's a beautiful and robust Holocaust survivor community and now descendants of Holocaust survivors that were settled in Kansas City, Missouri. And it's interesting because my grandfather, my biological grandfather, my mom and her sister's dad, my grandpa Villy, never spoke about his Holocaust experience. We know his story because it was sort of, my grandmother shared it with all of us. But he joined the American Army and served all of that and became naturalized, and then he couldn't handle it. And he moved back to Germany. He married a non-Jewish woman. He has another family. He went back. And just this, it was too much living in this other, he missed Germany and he went back to Berlin, and sort of that's sort of one strand. And my other grandfather, who I didn't know, he died before I was born, who my middle name is named after him, my grandpa Mendel, also didn't share his story very much, but my grandmother, she did. And so it was like this really interesting for me and my cousins and my generation, so deeply ever present. My fifth grade, or not fifth grade, sorry, in seventh grade, my National History Day history fair project was me telling my grandmother's story in her Polish accent. Like, I was born in Turek in a small town in Poland. Like embodying and like, you're right. So, right, what that looks like in these different generations. And it's, yeah, totally fascinating. So I guess that goes into teaching the Holocaust across generations. So how do you see Holocaust history being taught and transmitted differently across generations, both within families and also within educational settings? Which I know is like a hot button political issue right now. Let's not get into the hot button political part, although that's part of it, right? Feeling like censorship of story, censorship of, and then family story, like this is personal, this is us sharing my family story, as opposed to sharing something that is in a curriculum that must be vetted, right? So I think that sort of it intersects with the political component, but right. How do we see Holocaust history being taught and transmitted differently across the generations, both within families and educational settings? So we're going to start here and we're going to go that way, and then we're going to come back around.
So recently at school, so I'm in the JSU, the Jewish Student Union, and so me and the Jewish Student Union, oh, Wissahickon Middle School. And so me and three other girls, we found a video about the Holocaust, and we wrote speeches for like the school newscast thing. And on last Tuesday, they played the video over the announcements, and they played the video of us explaining the Holocaust and what happened. And I think that was really like meaningful, because that way, like the entire school, all, I don't know, 1,000 of us, got to learn more about the Holocaust and like understand it better.
I think the way that we need to go is to tell our stories, to tell our parents' stories, to tell our stories, to tell what we know. And I'm glad that Hammock has videos of survivors. I'm glad that Spielberg did all those videos, the Shoah Foundation. I have tapes of my parents being interviewed by Gratz College, and those are in the Holocaust Museum. And if you put my parents' names in, you can hear their stories. So I think we have to do it in a very first person way, not as something that happened 80 years ago, not as something that happened to other people, but this is what happened to my family. And this could happen to other families.
So I go to Kohelet, which is in Balacanwood.
That's all the Jewish students. Your school is one big Jewish student association.
I see. And so I don't know, it's less, we don't really have like a specific class that teaches us about it, because they kind of have like the assumption of everyone has their story, so we don't need to teach so much about it because everyone already knows. And so like sometimes we like touch upon it, and then I learn things and I connect it to things that I know about my family, and I'm like, oh, this is the same thing. Or hey, my great grandparents were part of that. My family like has something to do with that. But it's not, we don't like have a class about it. There isn't really a unit. It's just something that we all know and we all like have an experience with. So it's like, it's not so pronounced. It's more like you know what you know.
Interesting. And what grade are you in?
7th grade.
What grade are you in? 7th grade. Wait, so for people online, for the people online, I just asked the two fourth generation folks what grade they're in. They're both 7th graders.
Thank you. So I was struck in the film around a lot of things, but in particular the Holocaust denial, right? And it's still in our midst, Holocaust denial. It's not gone away. And it may never go away completely, but I know that my mother, you know, and my grandmother and our family, sharing the stories, as Simone, you said, and what you were sharing about sharing with your school, which I think is awesome that you did that. There are educators that I would say, you know, and curriculums in school districts in our country that teach the Holocaust the way it should be taught, and then not necessarily. Like reading a book and not really hearing the personal experience. And that, I think, is very much what your grandmother did, what my mother did, going and speaking to schools throughout the Baltimore area over 10 years of her life. And what I've started to do with HAMAC and speaking to schools and sons and daughters and other organizations around my mother's story and our family history. Because I think that's the most powerful thing. The students come away with that personal, you know, real information. And I think it's crucial to say that this is the truth. We are teaching and sharing the truth.
Nice. Awesome. We will open up for questions in just a second. I want to see if either of you two want to say something. Yeah.
As second generation, it was a big burden on my shoulders. How am I going to tell my parents' stories? And God bless Stacy. She has spent hours and hours putting our whole family's history together. She started Boston 3G. She's now with Philadelphia 3G, and she's done such an amazing job getting it into schools. She has a whole speakers bureau. I mean, she's done amazing things. So I'm very proud. Thank you.
With a lot of help. Thank you. The other thing I was just going to add is going into the schools, we used to always say we're supplemental, right? We are not educators. We are grandchildren. We're supplemental. And recently we've been finding we are less supplemental. And so we have been changing our content a little bit to start with what is a Nazi flag look like? What is a swastika? You know, how did the Nazis come to power? And some of these conversations that we feel are really important for the students to hear before going into our stories. And the other piece is propaganda. We now tell them, right, look at social media. What was once propaganda one way is now being shown through social media and making the students understand what that means and the danger of it.
So I just thought of something while I was listening to everyone. So I want to say like a month or two ago when I was putting together the presentation to share with my Hebrew school class, I was asking my mom a question and I was reading it to her and I said concentration camp and I just kept going. And she said, well, maybe you should put in the definition of like what that was. And I was like, well, everyone knows what a concentration camp is. And she was like, not necessarily. And I think that's so important for people that do know what it is to realize that not everyone does. People need to learn.
Oh, do you want to add something? Okay. Yeah. So actually, I want to bring this question a little bit bigger here. And this is everybody, whether you are yourself a survivor or the child of survivors, grandchild of survivors, great grandchild, or whether you have no survivors in your family. Raise your hand if you learned about the Holocaust first at school, Hebrew school or regular school, in a non-home environment. Raise your hand if you learned about the Holocaust first at home. All right. So I want to also notice the way in which people whose stories family stories that I'm getting shared at home also sometimes turn into the curriculum themselves, right? Like as we start to like learn about these things at school that we've been learning about at home for so long, right? How these things sort of come to it. Anyone here? Oh, of the people who learned it at home first, how many of you found yourselves being put on the spot to teach your classmates in a school or Hebrew school setting? Oh, not as many as I would think. Ah, okay. Interesting. I wonder if that's a generational difference. That's interesting. Cool. Interesting. So, yeah. They didn't discuss. If it wasn't discussed in your school or Hebrew school experience, raise your hand if the Holocaust was not overtly discussed or taught. You might have known that one of your teachers was a survivor, but it wasn't part of the curriculum at school or at Hebrew school. What? Or maybe, how about it wasn't in secular school? It wasn't in your public school. Okay? Wasn't in Hebrew school. Interesting. All right. Cool. Thought that was an interesting, just extension of that question for everybody.
So, my high school history teacher was Nora Levin. Nora was a Holocaust scholar. She started the oral history program at Gratz College. I had her for American history, world history, I don't remember which. She never talked about the Holocaust.
It wasn't part of the curriculum. Right. What year did you graduate from high school?
71.
Cool. So in the late 60s, early 70s. So we're about to open it up to questions in the audience. The first one's going to come from right there. But before we open up for questions for the audience, what is one thing that you hope that people will take away from hearing you speak today? One sentence. Oh, you wrote a paragraph. All right, we'll come to Dan last as he distills down to 2 sentences. You'll distill to 2. 1 sentence. 1 or 2 sentences. Oh, or you can pass it to someone else if you don't want to go first.
Okay, go ahead.
I think to never forget it and to always share it when an opportunity comes up, because if you don't, there is a much larger, I forget the word, there's a much larger chance that it could happen again.
I think just kindness and respect, giving each other kindness and respect, and thinking of others.
I think speaking about it and not assuming people know everything. I think that came out today, that we really have to go back to the basics.
I want to thank the 3rd and 4th generations for talking about it and keeping it alive. Keeping it alive. I don't have children or grandchildren, so you guys are doing it for me. So thank you. Thank you.
I agree with Gabby. Like keep it alive. Always share your story. It's obviously very hard occasionally, but you should always keep it alive because, as people say, history will repeat itself. Like it will happen again if the danger and the casualties and the horror isn't shared. You might not need to like share it in such a high volume where it's too much and you don't even want to hear it or process it, but you should always share it and like keep it alive.
I agree with with everything that was just said. And in addition, my mom would always say one of her legacies was treat the stranger with kindness and respect. And in particular, she would talk about the organization HIAS that was so welcoming to my parents, that helped them to adjust to a new country, new culture, new language, connect with other people. And so, in the times that we live today, you know, how are we treating the immigrants? Not with the respect that they deserve at all.
Okay, I want to open it up for questions for the panel. And I want to, as we go to our first question, I think that I want to remind everyone that we're asking questions. We could be a panel of like 60 people at least from amongst those of us who are here. We are not all here to ourselves be panelists. However, I do want to invite people to, after the panel, we're going to have some nosh in the community room. And please share your stories with one another, introduce yourselves to one another. Let's build community here in this gathering that brings people together from so many different concentric circles of community here in Philadelphia, the suburbs. I heard people came in from Brigantine, people came in from Reading, right? From all over beyond the suburbs. So let's build some community too. But so questions, yes.
It's not exactly a question, but my name is Iris Davis Brownstein, and I always say I'm Jewish on my parents' side. And talking about the educational system and sharing your stories, my kids, we were always members of a synagogue, and they always came in contact with Holocaust survivors, which I always thought was a wonderful thing. But I realized both my children went to Germantown Academy, and those kids really didn't have the opportunity to come in contact with a lot of survivors. So I did get in touch with HAMEC or Hammock, I'm not sure how you say it, and I brought a Holocaust survivor and a liberator to Germantown Academy for a couple of years in a row. And I can't tell you, like, first of all, it was the middle school and the upper school, and you could hear a pin drop when these people were talking. And then all the students lined up to like shake their hands and meet them afterwards. And the staff of Germantown Academy, the teachers, they all like called me and emailed me and said, thank you so much. That was so wonderful. So I think I'll get that program started again, even though my kids graduated. Thank you so much for sharing all of your stories.
Thank you. That's awesome. Oh,
Thank you for doing that, because they've invited us back every year since. Thank you.
awesome. Okay, let's, if you could pass this down to Sharon right here. Go there next.
First, from the bottom of my heart, I would like to thank the panelists and to say that I am particularly impressed by our two middle school panelists. Okay. There are many people in the Jewish community who appear to feel that the Holocaust is so sacrosanct that one should not make a comparison to anything that is going on anywhere in the world. And just to give an example of something that would be American, Governor Walz from Minnesota recently made a reference to Anne Frank. So I am not asking your opinion of what is going on in the U.S. politically at this time, but I am asking your opinion, is it okay? Do you think it is a good thing or a bad thing to make comparisons with Holocaust issues?
That's an important question. Thanks, Sharon. That's a really important and timely question. Who wants to take this one first? Oh my gosh, you guys are gonna have to rock, paper, scissors out. Okay.
I'd say it's a good thing, because even though it's hard, it like really shows like take it seriously. It shows how bad the thing can be, and people might think or say that it's too harsh, but I feel like if someone is using comparisons like the Holocaust, then the point is it is harsh, it is a hard thing, and they're using an example that they know people will take seriously. So, like, the subject or the example will be taken more seriously. It's on purpose.
I agree with that, but I don't think it's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. I think that, yeah, people would take it more seriously, but I also think that, like, that could also make the Holocaust, like, lose its meaning. Do you know what I mean? Because, like, if you say, like, oh, this person is acting like a Nazi, then the Nazis are going to lose their meaning when you say the word Nazi.
I think it's a powerful point. I very much feel the Holocaust is the Holocaust and it needs to remain the Holocaust. And we need to remember what happened to 6 million Jewish people. And that's my personal opinion. While there are atrocities happening, no question, the Holocaust is the Holocaust.
I'm from the further left. When I talk about the Holocaust, I talk about the 6 million people, Jewish people who died, and the 5 million other people who were murdered. And I don't want to call other things the Holocaust, but there are similarities. I know for my friends and sons and daughters, what happened in Israel on October 7th has terrified us because it's something that we felt never again, and here it was again. Not the same, but
It reminds me of Mark Twain and his famous quote, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes." Right. And there's a difference between equivocating two things with one another and learning from our history such that we are able to recognize rhyming moments, I think, and allowing those lessons from history to attune our eyes and ears to recognizing when similar signs begin to appear in the future. I'm also struck by the fact that whether it was my own grandmother, whether it was almost any Holocaust survivor, your mother, who I've had the pleasure of hearing speak of blessed memory as well, I don't think I've ever heard a survivor speak and share their story who did not end with some sort of universal message about looking around the world that we live in and watching for unchecked signs of hatred. That if there's one thing that that each and every one of the survivors who I've ever heard speak shares, it's that hate, when it goes unchecked and when it becomes systemic within a society, can spiral out of hand. And so while equivocation of various things can lead one down a slippery slope sometimes and can take the sting and the meaning and there's also, I think, a danger in going so far the other way. And also then forgetting what we have learned so much from the survivor generation and I think what so many of us as second generation, third generation, fourth generation survivors carry with us in how our ears and eyes have been programmed throughout our entire lives to recognize those frequencies and those dog whistles and those signs. And it can sometimes be a useful, it's hard and it re-traumatizes, and it can also be a useful barometer. Yeah, okay, so I think you were next, and then we'll go, wait, keep your hands up because I want to sort of establish a kind of an order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I wasn't going to break the rule. I'm going to break it a teeny bit. Just to say, I think that in hearing the answers, particularly from 2 middle schoolers to that last question, one of whom I know is very steeped almost entirely in Jewish world, and the other whose school district and schools specifically I have worked in as the education manager on the JCRC. I think that there's also an in-group, out-group question, and the answers came from that of course, everybody around me understands the seriousness of the Holocaust. It's not going to get watered down if I use that comparison versus people around me don't know, and it might water it down. And I think that that might also contribute to the answer at large. And I am very proud that my daughter is able to be up here. And I think that in thinking about whether or not it was okay to have her watch Traces and to be sitting up here, there's a question of responsibility as we pass this through the generations. My grandparents didn't share very much with their children until my generation came along, and they told their grandchildren, sort of, or they told their they told our parents so that our parents could tell us, and then answered some questions in bits and pieces for us. And I have felt the need to pass on, but I guess I'm wondering from the panel of multiple generations, how do we navigate that responsibility versus that protection that kids should feel or that adult children should feel as far as not being parentified?
Nice. So I want to get a couple of questions first, and then our panelists, because I'm noticing that our time is running low. So just so that I remember this one, this is how do we balance the responsibility of sharing our stories with also the responsibility. Right. Oh, right. Putting telling our stories down the generations and putting that responsibility on them, and also protecting our children from, like, right, allowing them to be children who are good and innocent and right in the world, and like what age is the right age, and like how do we balance that as parents and grandparents? Cool. And what was our second? Who was number 2?
All right, I'm greedy. My first question just requires a raise of hands. I knew you'd like that. How many of you have thought about or talked about leaving the United States in the last year? Turn around. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. My other question is for Stacy and Gabby. Wissa Hickens been in the news a lot. Sorry. Gabby, I'm interested in your point of view from a student and part of the student union, Jewish student union that you have there, and whether they how they reacted. And Stacy, as a parent, what do you feel the community reacted appropriately?
Okay, for those that don't know what we're talking about, there are a couple of things that have been going on in Wissa Hickens School District. One has to do with curriculum on the high school level in the distance learning program. That was last spring, having to do with representation of Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, both in history and current events. And also within Wissa Hickens School District, there was recently a firing of the principal of one of the elementary schools for making anti-Semitic comments about one of the school parents after having left a message on their answering machine or talking to them and hanging up the phone and thinking that the phone was hung up, and it was not hung up to another member of the school faculty or staff community. And of course, those comments were heard. He was fired. And then there was also something at a multicultural fair that went on in which the Muslim Student Association prioritized issues around Gaza and the Israeli war against Hamas over sort of any other Muslim cultural issues. I'm not sure how much of this permeated down to the middle school, but I will still hand this over to Gabby. What? Oh, the mural was at the middle school. Okay, cool. So then, okay, I'm going to hand this over. So we're going to take both questions at once. You can answer one or both of them. But actually, I think that there's a way in which they're kind of connected about sort of this intersection of children growing up within this contemporary moment. And yeah, so Team Wissa Hickens.
Team was second. So I would start with, although the Holocaust, right? I'm very involved with 3G Philly and sharing stories. We very much said to our kids, we do not want to share these stories until you feel ready. So I think that is a big piece in our home of making sure making sure that they mentally and emotionally feel prepared if you ever can be. And so you didn't really hear the stories until in about the last year or so. So I will share that for us. In terms of Wissahickon, the superintendent has been working with the Jewish Federation. Thank you to the Jewish Federation. And we did have a meeting. What I have seen is that there have been problems and they are being addressed. The hope is that they continue to be addressed. The hope is that, it's not all lip service. But as of now, what we have seen is that things that have happened. There was a firing immediately. The mural was taken down, and there has been action on the part of parents and on the part of administration. Fair to say.
So I think the thing that happened with the principal that really upset me, because these are people that kids are supposed to be able to trust and talk to and learn from. And if that's the example they're setting for fourth graders, that's not okay. I think that the way they handled it was good. I think that they fired him and whatever, but it needs to stop happening. You know what I mean? It can't happen.
But your experience in the middle school, have you felt anything? You can be honest.
At the middle school, not really. I think it kind of, it's like a Wissahickon thing, but at the middle school, exactly, I haven't really felt anything anti-Semitic or anything.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to address that question? Okay. And then I know that we're running low on time, so we're going to hear questions from our next two. Oh, did you want to answer this one? Or do you want to hear the next two? Actually, let's hear the next two questions. So who was number 3 and number 4? Wait, I think there was number 3 on this side. Yeah? Was it Amy? Wait, what? Oh, it was over here to number 3, 4, 5 were all on this side. Got it. Sorry about that. I forgot my own numbers, my own order.
Hi, my name's Esther, and I schlepped here from South Jersey. But I want to say I'm 2G, and in my family, I just got dribs and drabs of a couple stories, and no one discussed things till the 70s. That's why the two, and I feel particular burden because my uncle worked with Raoul Wallenberg. He was one of his main assistants. He left my uncle at the border. My uncle saved hundreds of people, and he died the last day of the war in Budapest, killed by the Nyilas, the Arab cross. But what I want to ask, people, if you wouldn't mind, I grew up, I only found out about things really because we had to write a story about your family and what happened, and all the other kids. And I grew up in a very Jewish neighborhood, but we didn't discuss the Holocaust. The others, their fathers were in the war, in World War II. And I asked my dad, yes, as American troops. And I asked my dad, what did you do in the war? And he kind of evaded the question. And I grew up like the other kids were very American, where my parents had the accent and they were a little older. And I was a little embarrassed about my parents. And when you're growing up, you want to be like the other kids. And my family was different. And I was also the only child, whereas everyone seemed to have siblings.
Yeah.
And also most only children I heard were spoiled. I had all this pressure on me to give my parents, what they would have.
50 teddy bears and a pink pony, right?
But I was wondering if any of you were embarrassed about whether parents or grandparents because you were different.
Nice. All right. So that's one question. What's the next question? Yes.
Thank you. I spoke to Simone about this before we started. I lived here 35 years ago as part of Sons and Daughters, moved back to Cleveland, just moved back here. And this program and the people in it were in a writing workshop that I was part of for 5 years. And if there is some interest in this room or this community in starting up a writing workshop, Stacy Goldring, who did this program and is now writing a book based on our writings. If there's any interest, Simone is you're gonna help me figure that out. But just to let you know that this group has done it, and Stacy started a group in Cleveland, and if there's a group that's interested here, then we'll get it started.
Rehearsal is about to start shortly, and so the Spielers were wondering where they were rehearsing. I told them in the boardroom. All right. All right, so let's take those two. What? A little levity, a little Purim spiel. Yes. Anyone want to address? Oh, if Dan still wants to answer yours, he totally can. Okay, so who would like to speak?
I can share a couple of things. You know, yeah, I think, right. And before people go, please realize there's some food and refreshments in the community room, so you're welcome to stay. You know, for me, it's something that I feel responsible for in terms of sharing my family history and story. Not everyone obviously is going to feel moved to do that necessarily. You know, I think my younger sisters are kind of coming around to wanting to start to speak. Perhaps they've chosen not to yet, but they know the history and they got the answers that they wanted and needed from, you know, my family, my grandmother and my mom. My sisters and I helped my mom put together her memoir, which, you know, was for our family first and foremost, both in the United States and here, but for general distribution too. And my mom continues to give gifts. She wrote an article that just came out. It was from a chapter in this book called The Hidden Lives, Stories from Child Survivors of the Holocaust, and put together by the Hidden Child Foundation and the ADL in Canada. And that just came out last November. So, you know, the stories are still held and being brought back into life because of the importance of doing it. And in particular, because of what and how, you know, certain schools, and Wissahickon is not the only school district by any means that has issues, as we all know, around how Holocaust education is taught and how, you know, some anti-Semitism is still going on in our midst, very, very much so. And it feels so important to teach, you know, and to share the stories so that students from middle school through high school and even into college especially need to learn and understand the history and the truth of what happened.
Wonderful. I also want to make sure that question about growing up as the child of survivors and feeling that you were somehow different from your peers, or grandchild or great-grandchild and feeling somehow different from peers, if that's played out in any way. I want to make sure that that gets covered as well. Who was first? I don't know. Oh, well, you said you talked to Simone. No, that was you who talked to Simone. Two of you for that one.
I grew up in Northeast Philadelphia, and my elementary school was 95% Jewish. I was surrounded by children of survivors. We did not talk about it. We knew each other. We knew our parents spoke with accents. Some of them were friends with other people who were survivors, but it wasn't something that we talked about. And then there were the American kids who were different than us.
For me, not so much, because like my school is Jewish, so we all kind of have the same experience, and we're not like the children or the grandchildren so much. A few of us are, of Holocaust survivors, but like it also doesn't really come into our conversations. Like we all like acknowledge that, hey, we have this shared past. Like most of us have some connection to the Holocaust, but we don't really feel different from each other that way. Like we all have the understanding and knowing, yes, we all share this story. So it's not so different for all of us.
So this was in, I think, fourth grade. It's not necessarily about the Holocaust, but it's more about being Jewish. So, I remember we had like our parents come in and like share about like our cultures, like Christmas and Hanukkah. And one of the boys in my class, his mom came in and she was sharing and she was like, "Does anyone know all of Santa's like reindeers' names?" And she was like, "I'll give you candy if you can get them all right." And I felt so left out. And I wasn't upset about being Jewish. I just didn't I felt different. I felt different. And I think it's important to learn about other cultures while also still being proud of who you are and what your upbringing was.
Your grandma wanted to answer the question. I think it would be.
One more question that was waiting on the, yes.
Sorry. Sorry, I hate to be that person that like everybody wants to go eat. There's food. It's actually pretty quick. My father was a German Jewish. He never called himself a survivor. My mother, they always said refugee, but now I know he was also a survivor. His parents did not survive, and so I had an experience where I wanted to share some things with his hometown. I'm having a hard time talking, and I ended up visiting Germany, the town where he came from, and there's a great effort in his town to remember what happened and to publicly apologize. And I went there and they had put the stones in the sidewalk and all of that, um, and I am just I'm gutted by what's going on in Philadelphia with the removal of these exhibits, and it has to do with crossing to what's happening now. And that I said it's so different there that the children of perpetrators are also victims. And I met some people there, and I think I was wondering if, and I'm new to this, I don't know any. I've never come in contact with any of the 2G organizations before. And I was wondering if there is an effort to connect with children of perpetrators and of what's going on in the other, especially in Germany. And I just don't know if any of you have had experience with that.
Okay. Apparently not non-panelist Amy Gortzman wants to answer that question. Oh, and also Fabulous from Hammock. Yeah? No? Oh, no. Okay, so we have a couple people who can answer. Does anyone on the panel, I don't know if you guys answer that question? Okay, I will defer to these two.
So I am not a NEG survivor, but I am married to a 2G. And my mother-in-law was a survivor, and she produced an exhibit that we've had here on the DP Camp exhibit, but besides that, she also published a book in collaboration with a partner in Germany. My mother-in-law compiled interviews of children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. Her partner in Germany, a German woman, compiled stories from interviews from children and grandchildren of Nazis. And they spoke about such similar things, that they were all victims of silence and of the families not, finding it easy to talk about the experiences until, later on after, as more years ensued after the war. But it's incredibly moving to read both sides and how similar they are. I think it's called Breaking the Silence. Silence is in the title. I'll look it up, and if anybody's interested, I have it at home. I can picture the cover. I think, yeah.
This addresses the issue of speaking with Nazi descendants that you were asking about. There's an organization called Action Reconciliation Service for Peace that has its American headquarters here in Philadelphia, very close by. What they do, it started out that it was descendants of Nazis that were volunteering to work with Jewish organizations all over the world. Now they get other people who are interested. They take this as an alternative to their military service for a year. And so they're kind of like conscientious objectors, to put it in terms we understand. And they work in Jewish, like nursing homes and refugee areas and homeless shelters all over America. And they do have their meetings here, and they arrive in America here. So ARSP, if you want to look it up and get in touch, and they will have a lot more answers for you.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, that's a great idea. So we are about 21 minutes over time. We could continue this conversation for hours this afternoon, and I want to encourage people to continue this conversation informally out in the. You have the title of the book, out in the community room over some nosh. How are we handling announcements? Let's talk about it over nosh. If people want to know the name of the book, talk to Amy. Okay, can you just shout it out? What's the name of the book? After the Silence. And what is the name of the event that you are promoting?
The World Federation of Jewish Holocaust Survivors and Descendants will be meeting in Philadelphia this year, October 23rd to 26th. Information for registration will be available April 1st on our website, holocaustchild.org.
Perfect thing to announce. Thank you. I'm sorry, Fabulous, but I'm glad that I didn't listen to you on that one. I want to thank our panelists so much, and I especially want to thank Fabulous and Jacob from Hammock for putting this program together, along with Sons and Daughters of Holocaust Survivors and our 3G, 2G Philly. And I want to thank our Holocaust Education Committee at Or Hadash and all of the partners who came together to bring this event together. Have a wonderful afternoon.